Hi Venkat,
Hi Deepak.
and it's good to have you here. I'm told that one of the things that we need to talk about is on owner-managed businesses. What does it mean in terms of their own success, not just to their businesses, but also to the people that they employ, and also to the larger economy. And while I think a lot of us look at owner-managed businesses very differently, and the perspectives kind of vary depending upon what type of company you're kind of looking at. I think one of the recent research reports that I read was around the fact that when companies are run by owners or when owner families are involved in running the businesses, this doesn't mean that professionals are not involved in the business,
Sure.
right? So it means owners running it themselves, or it is run by professionals with a very heavy involvement of the owners,
Sure.
still in the business, vis-a-vis a company where owners are no longer involved,
Sure.
right? It's totally professionally run. The owners probably don't even sit on the board. I think one of the trends that the research report indicated was that owner-managed businesses deliver far more wealth to the shareholders as compared to businesses that are run by non-owners. And while they also deliver enormous amount of wealth, the report actually highlighted the fact that that there are a lot of ups and downs in the way the growth. There are highs and there are lows.
Right.
As compared to, say, professionally run companies, which probably have a more linear line. Right. So having worked or advised owner-managed businesses, whether it is at Practus or otherwise, and I think you started. You were the CFO of a company that had a joint venture between an Indian owner and a multinational. What really sets some of these owner-managed businesses apart? What explains this yo-yoing, and what also explains the fact that there is far higher shareholder return for owner-managed businesses versus fully professionally run businesses? Wrong question, but
Yeah.
Maybe I just wanted to give a bit of a context.
Yeah, Deepak, as always, it's good to have the detailed context. So my observation in this has been that owner-managed companies are very distinct from professionally managed companies in terms of what is driving the enterprise and what is driving the owner-manager. I think the intensity of the passion, the entrepreneurial spirit is what is the differentiating factor. In terms of professional qualifications, in terms of experience, in terms of ability to cobble together a team, in terms of putting in place systems and processes, I think most of those factors can be done as well by professionals as what the owner managers can do. But owner managers bring this unique intensity to the table, which kind of explains how the characteristic or the dynamic or the cultural fabric of an owner managed company is very different from a purely professional managed enterprise. I think the intensity of the passion, it kind of plays out in two ways in my view. I think the depth of the passion gives birth to the enterprise, but also the depth of the passion gives so much fuel in the entrepreneurial tank that the owner as well as the company both become very resilient to failures and setbacks, right? I think what it also does is that the fuel in the tank, the entrepreneurial fuel in the tank, allows the entrepreneur to take a view that is maybe 10, 15, 20, 25, 50, 100 years from today, which is extremely difficult, I think, for a professional manager to do. And as you also clarified, this is nothing against the professional managers, it's just that the ability to think long term, by definition, I think is a lot better in case of owner managers. My own sense is, we'll have to kind of go back to the why. I think we'll have to go back to the motivations. Most owners are driven by the need to leave behind a legacy, right? Whereas most professionals are possibly in it. Of course, they're also there to leave a legacy, but maybe it is wealth maximization as the primary motivator. Maybe it is professional recognition as a primary motivator, but for an owner, leaving behind the legacy and the size of the legacy and the length of the legacy is what is a primary driver. So that is what I think explains the difference between the DNA of these two organizations. I think your your question, so let me now kind of come to the answers to the questions, right? So one question was, what kind of explains the superior performance of owner-managed companies to purely professionally managed companies? I think it's got to do with the longevity, right? And we all have heard about the power of compounding and how that kind of matters over long periods of time and how most of the benefits are really back-ended. I think owner-managed companies, because of their ability to kind of stay the course for a longer period of time, are automatically starting as at an advantage as compared to a professionally managed company. So to me, that is the answer to the first question as to why there is consistent overperformance. I think at a slightly more tactical level, I think owner-managed companies are also, I would say, somewhat tightly run. And this could be because of the fact that most owner managers have cut their teeth in the same company, right? So a professional might have spent maybe 3, 4, 5 stints in different organizations before he comes to the helm or he or she comes to the helm of an organization as a CEO or a CFO or a head of operations, head of manufacturing. But most owner managers chart their professional careers in the companies that they are now heading, right? So they are intimately aware about the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritties of the business, because they have got their hands around, wrapped their hands around who their customers are. They spend time in the market, they have spent time in the shop floor, they've probably done the accounting in their businesses. I think they really know what it takes to kind of run the company, right? And I think the control over the micro, and it can also be a bit of a disadvantage for owner-managed companies because they kind of end up spending too much of time there. But I think the control over the micro is, I think, what gives them an efficiency advantage, which I said explained is a little bit more tactical as compared to the long-term view, which I feel is a lot more strategic, right? So that was the answer to you, a long answer to your long question. The second question that you asked is what explains the yo-yoing, right? So I think it's got to do with going back again to the point about passion, right? I think when entrepreneurs take decisions, they take decisions a little bit more based on gut rather than data. And that's not, again, necessarily a bad thing, right? Because sometimes decisions to enter a new market or to go after a new customer segment or a new product innovation is just born out of an innate sense of the entrepreneur to be able to know the pulse of the market, right? And they're willing to commit themselves, they're willing to commit the organization's time, effort, resources, money, capital, whatever it takes to kind of see that idea succeed, right? Now, some of those ideas, when they succeed, they are blockbusters, but some of those ideas could fail, and which is the reason why you kind of see this yo-yoing performance. I think a lot of owner-managed companies that have scaled up have now put in place checks and balances to avoid this kind of a yo-yoing, right? So if you look at, say, companies that have been around for 50 years, 100 years, and we know the likes of, say, a Tatas or a Mahindras, which are still in some way, I would say, kind of owner-managed at a very high level, I think they have put in place more governance mechanisms that reduces this element of volatility, right? But is their performance more likely or more, how do I put it, more prone to volatility as compared to a 100% professionally managed company? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't go down the path of, my question was not around the Tatas and the Mahindras. I think it's very easy to give them as examples. Clearly, because I feel that while there is somebody floated this company, they are no longer in the helm as far as driving the company strategy, the operations, etc. is concerned. It's clearly run by professionals. I would categorize them more in the second bucket, which is these are companies which would deliver consistently steady returns over a period of time. These are not the companies which will have yo-yoing. These are companies which would have steady growth. Right, so I'm more. I want to get your perspective around around the Tatas and the Mahindras. We have got to talk about companies where entrepreneurs are firmly in the saddle. Also, I think the point about the entrepreneurial spirit and the passion. Are we making too much out of it? You and me, both of us know that when we talk to owners who are running their companies, they find it extremely hard to hire the right talent. Right, and then they don't hire the right talent, they go and do the job themselves. And are we guilty of calling that as entrepreneurial spirit? Why is it so hard for some of these people to go out and acquire talent? And why is it hard for someone coming from the outside to come and join an owner-managed business? Right, and the people, I think, to me, it's really, there is a very strong correlation between companies that are entrepreneurial in nature, but they've got the right people and the right culture, the governance, I think when they got all of that together, they became a truly great company, right? And the ones I feel who haven't got this thing right, they keep going on with the spiel of being an entrepreneur-driven passion and things like that. So how do you kind of explain that? And why is it so difficult to hire people?
Yeah. So Deepak, I feel that I have a lot of sympathy for entrepreneurs, okay, because I personally feel that they are a package deal. In an ideal world, you want to pick someone's best qualities, right, and then say that this is how the ideal person should be. But I don't think real life works that way, right? I think they're all flawed heroes. They're heroes most of the time, but they're all flawed, right? They make mistakes. They're very human. I think the ones who succeed in scaling up and truly institutionalizing their business are the ones who understand that they have got flaws and they got limitations, right? And it takes a somewhat evolved individual to kind of come to that recognition in the first place, right? And then the question is, what do you choose to do about it, right? The biggest challenge I feel for any entrepreneur when he's making the first professional hire is in deciding to let go. And then the question is about how much to let go. Right? If you look at it from an entrepreneur standpoint, the benchmark that he or she is going to have is to say that, can this professional manager do what I am currently doing at the same level of efficiency and effectiveness, right? Which is an extremely high bar to set, right? I think if we are able to get a professional manager who's able to do 50 to 70% of what the entrepreneur is doing, I think the entrepreneur is doing very, very well, right? But it's now a question of expectation setting. Most entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, hardworking entrepreneurs are extremely hard on themselves. So when they make these hires, they set the benchmark very high, both for themselves as well as the incoming professional. And I think that is essentially setting up that hire for failure, right? So I think it's all starts with having the right expectations, giving adequate time, right? Sometimes your expectations are right, but then you're expecting the professional to deliver something in 18 months, which probably is going to take 4 years, right? So people who have spent 20, 30, 40 years in the business, for them, and who have grown with the business, that's a huge advantage. For them to expect that a professional will come on board and start firing in the first 2 or 3 quarters is maybe not such a smart idea, right? And then you got somebody who's potentially a good fit, but let's say you're not having the right expectations, or you have the right expectations but don't give them enough time. You end up having a bad experience. And then that puts off the entrepreneur from this entire institutionalization hypothesis, right? They will say that, look, this is never going to work. I'll never get a CEO who can replace me, right? Which to me is somewhat unfortunate, somewhat tragic, because that's not the right conclusion to reach. Because if ultimately the goal is to institutionalize, leave a legacy, scale, even if you have got the first professional hire wrong, I don't think an entrepreneur has got a choice but invest the next time, right? Invest more time, more effort. So whether the entrepreneur is willing to kind of go down that path, that journey, and kind of stick to this theme of trying to institutionalize, I think is a question. Again, it kind of comes down to the stamina. Where I think 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs get it right is their personal stamina to do the work themselves, right? I think you always have to give 100 on 100 for the effort they put in. But do entrepreneurs have the stamina to last the course with regard to the mistakes they make in the institutionalization journey? Probably only 1 out of 10 gets it, which is the reason why there are a lot of entrepreneurs. But the ones who have truly scaled up their businesses, truly professionalized it, right, and who have been able to step back from the business without there being any material impact on the direction or the pace of growth of the business is extremely rare to find.
So isn't that a paradox, Venkat? I mean, on one hand, we keep saying that entrepreneurs want to see themselves in the professionals whom they try and hire, and therefore there is an expectation mismatch, or even a timing mismatch in terms of when they'll fire. But shouldn't that be the case even when they bring in family members into the business? Why is there so much of a rush to get the family member to kind of head a business or even take over from them? How do you expect somebody who's a 25-year-old to run a business in the next 5 years? And while you're willing to give that guy 15 years time, why not give someone who's a proven performer? And here we can't apply the same argument, right? So the entrepreneur had the passion, the spirit, it was his or her idea, and then here comes a professional who's supposedly the outsider, the villain, and because this guy has got to adjust to the entrepreneur. Okay, point taken. But then why is that not the case with an insider? And this is not to say that there aren't family disputes or there aren't adjustment problems, right? But in most organizations, one sees that there is an automatic succession plan without having a formal plan in place.
Yeah.
Most people are pushed to the top, right?
Yeah.
So why not show the same amount of patience in someone who's more proven?
Agreed. So I think it's as you said, it's a paradox. It's a reality. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but it's a reality, right? And I think the reason and I think entrepreneurs who do this are doing the wrong thing, right? When they're kind of trying to fast track their family members into the business. When there is a succession plan to bring in family members and they eventually succeed, it may not be necessarily because they are more capable. It could just be that they were given much more time, right? If a professional is given 3 years and a family member is given 10 or 12 years. Now, is that right, wrong? So sometimes it's got nothing to do with capability, but how long they're willing to persist with the individual. I think one of the reasons why entrepreneurs persist with family members is because they end up also mixing emotions and familial relationships with the business requirements, which I think is a very incorrect kind of a thing to do, right? While it's a tough thing to do, one needs to kind of bring in objectivity into decision making, and especially in an area that is as critical as senior leadership. For an entrepreneur not to be objective about it and choose to kind of bring in a family member purely because of them being your progeny or them sharing your DNA is a bit unscientific, it's subjective, and I think incorrect thing to do, right? Whether it should be happening, the answer is no. I think as a bare minimum, what every family managed business should do is to make sure that the next generation has got a stint of working outside the business. It allows 2 or 3 things to happen, right? One, the next generation does not come in necessarily with a sense of entitlement, right? Because you're doing the stint outside. Okay, that's I think a very good learning experience for the next generation. To just forget about the skills they learn, just to not take things for granted. The second thing, which I think is hugely beneficial to the next generation, is just the exposure outside. I mean, work in a different environment, work with different types of personas, different decision-making styles, different reporting structures, right? Maybe it's a global environment, right? It just broadens your horizons. You are able to kind of bring a much more broader perspective when you join the family business. So rather than you finish your graduation and you're brought into the business, spend 5 years, 10 years outside, right? I mean, your family business is not running away anywhere, right? So spending those a decade outside, I think, can be a vastly enriching experience for the individual concerned and also for the company into which the individual is kind of being brought into. I think a third aspect is that every family member who joins the business, in my view, has to go through an interview process. I think the company HR should be empowered to actually run that interview process. I think it's a very good idea to bring in external board members or mentors to run that interview process. And I think the qualification criteria should be the same. I mean, if there is a lack of experience, qualification, past demonstrated experience, it should be a reject. And I don't think it's something that anybody should kind of take personally, right? If the objective is to run the business and scale the business in a professional manner, in a sustainable manner, then you have got to do right by the business, right? And if you think about it that way, then the interview process to set the qualification criteria for the next generation is absolutely a must. So somewhere I think entrepreneurs need to wear that hat to say when they should be the voice of the business rather than being the voice of me as a mom or a dad or whatever, right? I think entrepreneurs who are able to kind of make that distinction will, I think, get their succession planning right with regard to whether to bring their children in or not.
I think having explained this, okay, a related point is around conflict management. And when I say conflict management, it's not just conflict between the family in a family-run organization. It is also the conflict that comes with getting certain family members into the business. While I think we live in a culture where people do not express their dissatisfaction when a family member joins the business. But imagine someone having worked in the business for the last 15-20 years and then someone else gets parachuted despite the fact that there is an interview process and it is made transparent to them. But yet I think what took somebody 15 years will take this guy five years. Okay, so conflict management A, from the standpoint of when you induct a family, there are two parts to this question. One, when you induct somebody from the family, how do you kind of avoid or reduce conflicts within the family, because the family is actually working both at office and they have got to face each other at home. And B, how do you manage conflicts or reduce conflicts between the next generation and the people who have worked damn hard to get to the same position as the son or the nephew or whoever?
Yeah. So I think the first question, right, as to how to avoid conflicts at home, I think the rules need to be set up front, and I think preferably be documented. In terms of, and it's not necessarily between one generation and the other. It could also be between the same generation, right? Because there could be younger siblings, for example, who kind of join the business, and there could be age gaps, as we see typically, right? It could be a span of 15 years, where let's say you've got multiple cousins who are getting involved. Now, question is that each one matures at a different point in time, right? So maybe some of the older members of the family have set up the business, and then you've got younger ones who are kind of coming in. I think at every step, it's important not to assume that the strength of the personal relationship is going to be so strong forever that it is going to help override every single possible flashpoint on the business side, right? While that might be the case, and that's why family managed business is so successful, because the personal trust allows them to surmount a lot of issues which between two professionals may not be possible to always resolve. But I think it's important not to take that for granted, right? So a dispute resolution mechanism, and it all starts with saying that, okay, what is your role? What is my role? How do we assess each other without having to necessarily ask each other for a report, for example? How do we judge whether you are successful in your role or not? How do I judge whether I'm successful in my role or not? If you're not able to kind of resolve something, is there a family governance council that we need to kind of go to? Do we need to bring an external party into that governance council to bring some objectivity? These are all, I think, might be slightly sensitive issues to talk about, especially in an Indian environment, but I think they are necessary issues to be talked about, right? And I think they should be documented. It's also very important to keep reviewing this document on a year-to-year basis, right? Because people change, right? Their aspirations change, their company's needs change, right? So we all have to keep adjusting this. So can there be some principles that will last the test of time? So for example, we will always put the business above us is a principle that will necessarily need to last, okay, for 2-3 decades. But internally, how we kind of think about our roles can be a tactical thing. I'm not saying change it every quarter, but can it be changed every year, every 2 years? I think it should. I don't see it to be wrong. In fact, I think it's very healthy for that kind of a discussion to happen. So can conflicts at work, can it be eliminated? Answer is no. But the possibility of mitigating is very high if that documentation exists. That document is not from a paper standpoint, but just the manthan, as they call it, right? The thought process, the churning that happens between two people to say, yeah, this is what we should be doing. That thought process is important, right? The document is only an outcome of that certain thought process. I think the second part about whether existing loyal professionals in the company are likely to feel peeved with a younger family member coming on board. I think it's very important to maintain transparency and maintain an element of objectivity, and also maintain clear communications with people involved, right? When a new family member comes in, that individual should be seen as having earned a spot. So if that is being consistently done, and this individual is genuinely a high achiever, okay, then I think the sense of feeling peeved or left out is probably a misplaced one. Right? So even professionals can go wrong in the way in which they are managing their emotions, right? So if truly the next generation is capable, they have earned their spurs, they have got a past track record of having demonstrated success or achievement of the KPIs in the family business, then why should a professional feel peeved about it, right? Then this person, we can also not be unfair to the next generation. But I think, to me, the balance can be achieved only if the older generation is clear that they're going to kind of treat the next generation on a bit of a hands-off basis, and for the incoming generation to kind of come without a sense of entitlement.
So that brings me to probably the last two questions. One is around how do you see owner-managed businesses creating value right? And we can define value in different ways. One of the things that you hear when you talk to a lot of owner managers is the fact that all my wealth is actually stuck in the business, right? So how do you kind of go about monetizing this? I want to kind of point out that Practus recently did that study, right, which we looked at about 150 companies which got listed in the last couple of years, and one of the things that we saw was most of these companies were owner managed businesses, and they created significant wealth for the shareholders, which is the non-family shareholders, as well as for the shareholders, and also for the people who work for these organizations. So they did something which was significantly different as compared to so many people out there who are not able to monetize and who keep saying that all my wealth is in the business. So what are the top 3-4 areas where some of these companies have managed to differentiate themselves significantly as compared to the others?
Yeah. So I think it's got to do with the consistency and discipline around I think allocation decisions is the way I would put as a number one criteria, right? So one of the things that I believe is probably the biggest differentiating factor in entrepreneurs who go out and build huge valuations is where they have chosen to allocate their capital, their time and effort, and also their company resources. It's not that entrepreneurs don't make mistakes in these decisions, they do. But I think when they make mistakes, they pivot quickly. They take decisions to cut their losses and kind of go embark on a new direction. One of the things that we have seen at Practus with entrepreneurs is a huge ability, right, to kind of work hard and take risks. But this is not necessarily channelized in the right direction. For instance, very few owner-managed companies have got a very clearly written out vision and mission statement that is updated on a regular basis. Very few have got operating plans. I mean, they may have a budget, but are these operating plans deep enough to kind of go down to the operating levers of the business? Many of them do not have a balanced scorecard or an equivalent system, both for themselves as well as their direct reportees. They may not necessarily have IT systems that are strong enough or robust enough to kind of support their growth plans. Many of them don't even have a well-defined go-to-market system, right? So I think, as Practus, when we go into these companies and we're obviously helping these entrepreneurs to kind of set some of these building blocks in place, we realize that the ability to unlock value dramatically changes, right? So, a typical owner-managed business, because they're run by smart, hardworking people, would grow at a certain pace. But question is, can we do something fundamentally to the way in which the organization is run? Give better direction, channelize the efforts of the organization and the entrepreneur better, that you are able to derive exponential value for themselves and for all other stakeholders. Typically, this journey takes about 3 to 5 years for it to happen. But I think for owner-managed companies who are willing to kind of stay the course, and where the depth of conviction is there to say that, look, it's nothing to do with spending fees on a consultant. It's got to do with commitment to the change process, right? Because that's the simplest thing is to cut a check. The hardest thing is to stay put with the change management process. I think entrepreneurs who are willing to kind of recognize the fact that what's got them till here may not necessarily kind of be the right thing, take them to the next level. People who are clear about that, who are willing to change, and who are willing to back that change, that conviction to kind of say that, look, I want to go to the next level, and there will be a few blips along the way, right? I may get some change management initiatives wrong. I think they are the ones who end up creating that massive wealth for themselves and the stakeholders.
So 3 quick takeaways or 3 quick areas where you think entrepreneurs should be spending the maximum amount of time.
Yeah, so for me, the top one would be customer. Knowing the pulse of what is it that your customer or client wants and where those needs are heading over the next, say, 1, 2, 3 years, right? How do you kind of catch the changing preferences of the customer before it hits your business, right? Ability to kind of see forward through a customer lens and then finding out how you can service that requirement. So that to me is number one. I think the customer is the most important person in the room. The next one I think is culture. of the organization, which is something not just internal in terms of how your people behave and how they relate to the company vision, etc., but generally culture in terms of how do we deal with our customers, how do we deal with our vendors, our business partners. So when somebody from the outside experiences one of your team members, are they able to almost feel the physical difference that look, this individual is from a different kind of a company, right? So to me, that's a function of culture. I think the third aspect is a strategy, which is connecting the dots, right? We'll always have very good professionals who will be able to do their respective jobs well, and of course they understand the holistic picture. But I think owner-managed company, it's very important for the owners to kind of be able to connect the dots, right? Because it's not just it's a multi-dimensional thing. You need to connect dots between people, between functions, between us and the external environment today. But you also need to be able to keep those dots connected in the continuum of time, right? How do you connect the present with the future, for example? That's also a couple of dots to be connected, right? So that to me is the third aspect that an entrepreneur should be focused on.
On connecting the dots, maybe it's my last point here. I think Steve Jobs once famously said that you can only connect dots looking backwards. You can never connect the dots looking forward, because you don't know what those dots are, right? And the connecting of the dots make a lot more sense in hindsight as compared to when you're trying to do it. But point well taken, Venkat, on this. I think.
Deepak, one of the challenges that a lot of owner-managed companies have is in kind of figuring out what is the lens that they should take with regard to the future, right? I mean, every entrepreneur dreams big. They want to kind of, take a blue sky approach, achieve scale, etc. But equally, there is a reality of here and today, where there are limited resources, there's limited time, right? For someone who is looking to build a truly successful scaled-up business, what is the right way to look at this? How does one balance between an opportunity-led view and the reality of a constraint-led view?
So I think whether it's owner managers or whether these are professionals, you cannot take only one type of a view. You can't just take only a long-term view, right? Because you have also got to work on the short term, the ultra short term, the medium term, and the long term. As an entrepreneur or as an owner manager, I think this probably comes a lot more naturally, because I'm just looking at, say, myself and saying that when I look at my own day, I'm probably dealing with issues which are ultra short term to the long term, and that's, I think, part of the job. I think you've got to kind of balance that out. Or you've got to look at all those views. However, I think one has got to be very consistent. So when I talk to owner managers, whether they are our clients or whether these are people whom you interact with, one of the things that I notice is a lot of them possibly are not consistent. Once a strategy is in place, whatever that strategy could be, I mean, whether we can debate whether that strategy is fully thought through, it's fully baked, not baked, etc. But it is a strategy. I think most of us are guilty of not being consistent with the implementation of that strategy. You kind of give up too easily. When I say give up, it's not that you're saying nothing can be done about it, but you're just moving away before it actually yields results for you. So being consistent with what you have committed some time back, I think, is very, very critical. And that's probably one ingredient that you don't see people do as much as they ought to do.
Got it. Also, Deepak, let's look at this again, a very typical problem, right? The question is that I can be persistent, but I could also be foolishly persistent, right, in kind of pursuing something. The challenge is you don't know whether a strategy is going to be successful or it's going to fail, right? So question is, at what point do you say, look, I made a mistake and I'm going to pivot direction? And at what point do you say that, look, no, I need to kind of continue to kind of plug away because the strategy has not run its course? So are there any frameworks that you have advised some clients on in the past to help them think through this kind of a trade-off or a dilemma?
See, I think a lot of times when we talk of strategy, we think about the outcomes or the consequences. Our strategies are framed keeping in view whether it will have the outcomes that make me ultimately succeed, right? While that possibly may not be 100% in our control. In fact, I think we've got very little control on what could come out of this. And one of the things that we keep telling our clients is the fact that you can only control what is controllable. You don't worry about what you cannot control, right? So in my view, I think rather than build out a plan which focuses too much on the outcomes, do everything that is possible that you believe will make the company or the strategy work 100%. Okay, and if you need to make tweaks to that, keep making those tweaks. And I know what I'm saying could be the opposite of what I said some time back, which is an entrepreneur has got to work on the ultra short term, etc. But at least on the long term, if there is conviction that there are these set of activities that you need to do in order to which are right today in the interest of the business. I don't know what is going to be right in 3 years' time, but today, if this is right for the business, you ought to do those. You ought to do those things without getting too worked up about what the consequences could be, while still dealing with, if you've got a cash flow pressure, you've still got to deal with that cash flow pressure. You've got to still pay a vendor who has not been paid. You've still got to do that. But at least don't compromise on this aspect, because the more you try and bring your ultra short-term thinking into a long-term strategy, I think the chances are that it may not work. I mean, we have always heard this, right? Because as finance professionals, we have always heard that, and we have seen this even with the companies that we advise, that you cannot use short-term, long-term capital for a short-term initiative. The consequences are going to be disastrous. Then why not apply the same thing in the way you design your strategy and then you go about implementing it? I think that's probably one thing that I see that we keep advising our clients or keep working with clients so that they stay on course and they get the implementation right.
Got it. So I think the key takeaways here are have separate set of objectives or goals for each time horizon, and these may not necessarily be at conflict or contradiction with each other. Second, focused on what you can control. Let's leave out the result, because that's a function of multiple things that were not necessarily within your sphere of influence. Seems to be so somewhere it looks to be like focus on the process. Hopefully that will kind of get you the outcomes rather than kind of necessarily judging the success of a strategy basis the outcome seems to be the
and also align your capital allocation plan to that. Accordingly. Okay.
So I think on that point of capital allocation that you just alluded to, are there any frameworks that you have used or come across or advised clients with where you're helping them to calculate almost the ROI on the investments that they're making, right? And if you can give us some examples, say from maybe a sales and distribution standpoint, or maybe from a production or supply chain standpoint, that will be
correct. So I think the one of the ways, so one is, again, I'm not going to go into whether this will yield monetary benefit or not. I think I think that's what we need to do it, but I'm going to kind of take a step back and explain this a little bit differently, right? So if, let's say, there is a decision around driving growth for an organization, right? Typically, I think there are 3 key levers. There could be more levers in terms of how you could drive growth, right? So you could expand into a new geography or a territory. You can look at a new customer segment, right? Or you could do product innovation. I think you spoke about product right. innovation or new products or services. Now, when you look at all 3 dimensions, typically I think we all get carried away with the fact that someone comes to us and says, this market has got so much potential. Why are you not in that market? So our reaction is, oh, you know what? I'm possibly missing out on something. It's like picking a stock. You look at a stock only when the stock has run up. Nobody even touches that stock when the stock is kind of languishing or it is building up, right? Because the real gems are those which are kind of building out and you don't even realize that it is building out. So even decisions around markets are typically taken that way. Most people tend to get into a new geography once the market has really matured. You already have all your competition sitting there, and it becomes extremely hard for you to get in. So one of the frameworks that you could really use is that what is the risk and the reward that you're going to get by investing your time, your capital, and your people or your resources in doing what you're doing very well in the geography that you're in, vis-a-vis going to a new geography. Okay, is it even worth the time and the effort and even the risk mitigation. I think we also make a virtue out of this whole entrepreneurship to say that entrepreneurs take decisions which are not backed by data, gut, and things like that. In my view, I think the more successful ones that I have seen or we have seen together are those who kind of negate the risks or minimize the risk. So an entrepreneur also needs to know when to cut the risks. It is not just about all the time about looking at opportunities. It's also about cutting down your risks. Right. So when you apply a geography expansion decision by using a certain framework, then risk becomes a significant element, because why would you kind of lose everything that you have built in one geography by going into another geography, right? And then losing everything. It cannot be a vanity project.
Sure.
However entrepreneurial or however passionate you may be about things. So that's one example of how you could use a framework to advise a company or to work with an owner manager in helping him or her take decisions.